everybody. Welcome back. Next up, we've got a nice chat here with Tatyana, who is the CEO of FuzzyBot, longtime industry veteran, seen the industry from a lot of different angles. So, diving right into it, let's start with tell everybody how you originally got into the industry and then walk us through what you've been doing up to a FuzzyBot.
I think I started in a pretty stereotypical way, which is I was a really big gamer growing up. And then I studied computer science in high school and took programming in college. And that landed me my first industry experience as an intern at Microsoft Game Studios. I was a technical producer there for 4 years. And then I moved over. I had this itch to go and study abroad and kind of take advantage, or I guess work abroad, not study abroad, take advantage of the fact that the gaming industry is worldwide. So I landed a gig working in Sweden on the Need for Speed franchise. And that led me to a job within the DICE Los Angeles studio on the Battlefield franchise. And then within that studio, I spent about 3 years working within incubation teams and new IP ideation teams. And that experience really kind of fired me up with the prospect of doing things from the ground up versus working on these mega blockbuster franchises. And so in 2020, ended up splitting with the incubation team that was working within DICE LA. And so we started our own studio, FuzzyBot Games. And from the get-go, kind of our idea was to take all of our experience, but then really try to flex our creative muscles. As a new team, also much smaller, much less funding than EA. So our focus is on creating games that aren't as M for mature as, like, let's say Battlefield is, but appeal to a wider demographic. We have a bunch of folks that are parents now, but also still really leaning in on our experience of building multiplayer action games.
So how many, I mean, obviously that's going from a gigantic team and organization to the indie world. So how big is FuzzyBot?
So we started off 5 people. So about 2 years ago, we were like 5 people. And then for a while, we were around 10. Now we're in production. And so we're 20 full-time people, but we work with a pretty great cohort of part-time folks all around the world. And so overall, I would say we have close to 35 people working on the project within any given time.
So at what point, I mean, we see this cycle take place. A lot of people in the industry go through the very same thing. It's like you're either at a small studio and then you go AAA, and then you're like, oh, wait, I want more freedom and I'm going to go back to indie. And then it's like, oh my God, I want a real paycheck. So I need to go back to AAA. What were some of the things that, I don't want to say you had grown tired of, but what were some of the things that, led you on that idea, on that little journey of, okay, let's start something a little more smaller, a little more intimate, where we're all in a little more control?
So I would say it was 2 things. One, it was like a burning desire to do so. So we, like I said, we were in this, we kind of had some of that experience within EA, trying to both, ideate within Battlefield ideation pods, but also trying to get something up from scratch. And that creativity, that like starting with a small brain trust of folks, that was really just motivating to all of us, because my co-founder has worked on, Assassin's Creed was a giant project, and Battlefield and Medal of Honor. We have a lot of folks that worked on really great franchises and kind of have enough, vanity credits, so to say. But the idea of building something from scratch really came from that experience of trying to do that within a big company. But also what was really important is we found each other. We had a really great creative cohort where everybody was complementing each other and amplifying each other's ideas versus having kind of a creative, like too much creative tension. And then opportunity, it was, I would say about 3 years ago, was kind of the golden time for new studios starting up because there was funding availability. So during the pandemic, games as an industry grew a lot when people didn't have a lot to do. So they were gaming, and the engagement was going up, the spend was going up. So there was a lot of different parties, from investors to publishers, all kinds of folks that were interested in investing in games. So we found it particularly during that time easier than any other time, and wanted to take advantage of that opportunity, because who knows when that will happen again. I mean, even right now things are consolidating, so we were happy to get started when we did. So it was both like the right team, the right kind of motivations like in our career, but also the ability to get funding, because none of us were in a place in our lives where we could have bootstrapped for, let's say, a year.
So give everybody a high level understanding of the difference in scope here between what you're working on the Battlefield franchise and then what you're doing with Project Saturn. How big of a difference in game scope, budget, timeline are you seeing there?
Yeah, I guess for context, probably the smallest title I worked on was probably like Forza Motorsport 3 or 4, back when that was like before Horizon came out. And if I was to guess, we would have had probably 40 to 60 million development budget, and then double, not maybe full double, but with marketing probably just under 100. And that was roughly 65 people in the studio at the time, and then we had maybe 40 to 60 contractors. And Battlefield is huge. It starts off usually with a team of around 90 people, and then towards the end, it could be up to 600 people. I think it might have been even 900 people on the last one, that come together from every single location around the globe. So even me, as one of the more kind of experienced senior producers, I had a team of maybe 50 to 70 people, but that was just like a pod within the bigger machine. It's actually, I would say, really like science meets art to coordinate everyone to make that happen. Things like incredible discipline, communication becomes really, really important, and small mistakes and that can have pretty big impact on a lot of people. You do end up, as a game developer, managing processes, managing communication, and managing the machine much more than like the creative, bringing cool ideas together. And then like here, it's small enough to where I comprehend almost everything that goes into game, every design, every feature request, every bug. I'm the only producer person, as well as running the studio, and it's manageable. And in that way, there's also space for creativity for everyone, because there's less of this overhead of managing the giant machine of game production.
All right, so that brings up something really pertinent right there. How do you go about managing the production with managing the business side, running the studio? And we'll get into the whole VC funding thing, but I mean, how do you go about doing that on a daily basis? How do you separate those?
I would say that my experience at EA was invaluable for this, because the way that EA trains particularly the production staff, producers and development directors, and I've had the experience of being on both ends, development directors being more project management focused and producers being more product management focused, is that they really focus you on running a business. So you're in charge of budgets, you're in charge of P&L, you work with legal, you work with all these entities for your specific project. So transitioning out of EA, for sure, there wasn't, a department for everything, but I generally knew everything that had to go into the business. Even if I didn't directly touch it, I've been aware, I've been trained on it, I've had an idea. And then also part of it was the folks that invested us early on also provided that operational support of going through, here's the critical things that you need to set up. Luckily for me, when we were setting up the studio and we had to get accounting and legal support and business insurance and things like that, workers' comp, we were 5 people. So the production needs for that group of people, ideating very early on, was very minimal. So I was able to focus 90% on setting up the company, and knowing that at some point the production would get much more intense, I specifically picked things that could run themselves. So for example, our accounting support is actually half people support, half a tool that this startup built. And I would make a side note that one of the great things about starting a company now is that there's so many tools for doing payroll, for doing taxes, for doing a lot of business things that other startups have focused on to optimize. So like logistically, there's a lot more tools that you could use that make running a business much easier, particularly a tech business, I would say. So I invested a lot of time early on in the company when I had the time to make sure all the things I picked could run themselves. And so nowadays, when 80% of my time is more on the game production, a lot of those things are just on rails. And sometimes things flare up. I would say the hard been recruiting, because we don't have budget to have recruiters or to work with firms. So it all kind of usually falls on me. That gets really, really crazy whenever we put out some recs that are popular. But otherwise, like when the business comes up, usually the production's a bit slower and vice versa. And it also helps that our team is small and mostly super experienced people. So there's a lot of work that they take on themselves, and they don't wait for me in terms of running their departments and organizing things.
So what are some of those tools? I know you have like Gusto for payroll, but what are some of the other tools that you use to make things run easier?
Yeah, Gusto is a big one. That's the one that we use. So that does like benefits and payroll and, holiday tracking, expenses, things like that. We currently use Brex, but there's also Ramp and a bunch of other corporate cards, which aren't really credit cards, but they enable people, like, for you to assign cards to people so that they can make purchases and upload expenses. There's a Guideline, which is great if you want to set up 401k plans for employees and other benefits type things. Usually it used to be very complicated, but it enabled way for small companies to be able to manage it. We use Zenny for our accounting. So what I love about them is that they have a live dashboard that tracks all the money going in and out of your company in real time. And then they do end of month, like reconciliation and fixes. So you don't need to like wait too long to get a state of your stuff. I'm sure there's others, but I would say like Gusto's a big one. Zenny's a big one in terms of accounting. And obviously, like one of the big things since I started in the industry is that we have Unreal and Unity. Like Engine used to be a pretty big hurdle, but now that's a tool that has great support and great education. There's also tools that you can use or new companies that write backend software like Wise for audio, et cetera.
So what are y'all using? Are you on Unreal or Unity?
Yeah, we're on Unreal.
I'm wondering if we're not going to start seeing that cycle again where, because of all this Unity drama, developers start going back and saying, you know what, I'm just going to do this ourselves again. I mean, we just saw Party Animals get launched. That was completely in-house studio. Do you think that we're going to start seeing the rise of that again? Or do you think the industry is going to stay more on two or three established engines?
I am in no way going to say what I think I predict there. It always usually makes sense that if your game has very specific engine needs, then you should, pick based on that. Like if it makes sense to do a proprietary engine, it could, like racing games, for example. Yes. Forza Motorsport has a proprietary engine. That is the thing that really makes sense to optimize for car games, which have very specific requirements in terms of travel speed and loading zones that is very different from other games which don't traverse the environment as quickly. Same thing for, if a game is hyper physics based but low fidelity, there's better engines than, I would say, Unreal. Frostbite has been designed for Battlefield in mind in terms of supporting that many units. Again, I don't think Unreal would do super great support running Battlefield. So there's still cases where custom engines absolutely make sense, but it is it is expensive.
Mhm.
And so for a lot of action games, using Unreal and Unity makes total sense and is probably worth the price. It's not crazy egregious for the amount of support and development that you get.
And with the projects that come through here, the ones that I generally see that are doing proprietary engines that I don't just like roll my eyes and go,
Mhm.
oh my God, now what, are
Mhm.
racing games because they
Mhm.
are
Mhm.
so outside the boundary. You don't really think about it as much from a gamer
Mhm.
perspective, but from a technical standpoint,
Mhm.
it's a significant, difference.
Mhm.
So as you all started the company, talk about how you went through that initial creative process to come up with the game design, decide what you want to do, establish that, I don't want to say timeline, but get that
Mhm.
plan laid out for that first game.
Yeah, one of our really big learnings having come out of EA was that having a concept that's super crystal clear early on is crucial. Um, like that's where a lot of things can get muddy. Is if you have, let's say, some gameplay design ideas, but it doesn't really fully develop into a concept you can easily explain. So the concept we ended up going with, which is basically making a mission-based, more accessible roguelite with some elements of town building that are seen in, let's say, live sims and defense games. Kind of just was like second or third concept that we developed. And it just, when our engineer and designer were riffing about it and they came to this like Hades meets Animal Crossing, it felt so succinct and it felt like a concept that could write itself. And it was really, really motivating for the team. So as the second or third concept we tested, this one kind of seemed to unlock the most creativity and problem solving within the team, and that's what we were looking for. So we went with that one. It was kind of easy to explain. Since developed it outside of like X meet Y because that's always feels a little bit cheap. Um, but um, but yeah, it was the we tried it. It seemed to really unlock a lot of flow and great ideas in the team, and that was kind of the first. Yes, let's roll with this. Um, and then and then we started prototyping. So we initially prototyped just like different combat mechanics that we were interested in. So the first, I think, 3 to 6 months, we were just really getting comfortable with the idea of doing like procedural levels and this like one more go, try new pickups and things like that through this roguelike mechanic, and just trying to really find a cool combat feel. That was what we spent most of the initial process on before we touched any of the you spawn in a town, you have some perma progression, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and the thing that we settled on is a lot of the combat revolves around a grappling hook that you can upgrade and use in different ways and create this kind of fun with physics moments. So and that concept, like this combat style, just really appealed to things that the team was good at, which is fun with physics, action combat, co-op gameplay, etc. But then introduced enough freshness in its art style and different combinations of things that you can do when you go back to your hub world that really inspired the team, because game dev is hard, so you want to feel, and we left like really stable jobs and opportunities to do this, so you want to work on something that's like exciting and fuels you every single week. So this concept had both like inspiring the team, but also utilizing the key strengths that we have.
So from the business perspective, and obviously because you're going to have to go and you're going to have to
Mhm.
sell VCs on this vision as well, where did you draw the balance between what gets the team excited and engaged and what is a game that's actually going to make money?
So I would say that we mostly focused on things that felt right to us, to be honest. We didn't try to, outside of like, painting a really cool opportunity, because we did set out to make a game that would be widely appealing. We weren't looking necessarily to make the most niche game or one that just felt cool to us. We were, we did build a studio because we want to have a really successful studio versus just one particular game. We want to build a place where we can retire out of, and I mean that in like a very positive way. as in something that is creatively fulfilling and enables creative growth and career growth, and also that enables us to support like our families, etc. So so this idea of having business success made us pick a concept that we were excited about, but also that could be commercially viable. And then we pitched it, and we kind of eliminated people who didn't really believe, and we ended up getting people who saw it for even bigger opportunity than we did. And I think that's the perfect partner for us as a studio, which is somebody that pluses us up versus just us trying to like sell them or maybe paint a different picture than what we believe in.
Come on, Tatyana, we don't really get to retire in this industry. That's a myth that they keep telling us that we're going to get to do.
That's the dream, though.
That's just, yes, it is. That is the dream. But all right, so let's talk about the VC side. So having worked in the industry, you had a wonderful track record. You built together a team that also had a lot of AAA experience on there. What was that path that you all took on the way to, pitching the game, getting the funding, that sort of stuff?
So we started the studio with a loan. And then this was like early 2021. We announced that we had gone live. So just so that there was no mystery about what the hell did these people do? Like, they left. Where are they? Like, are they alive? So we just announced it, mostly like, targeting our industry friends and family. And when we announced it, we did get a couple of pings about both, publishing, but also investment. So one of the first pings we got from Eric at Sisu Game Ventures. He worked with my co-founder, Max, had a lot of respect for him from that experience, was very curious about what is this new thing that he's endeavoring. On my end, I had known Ali from Makers Fund. And I think I had reached out, and then he reached out also, like curious to both just support being new into the VC space on how to tailor a pitch and encouraging. So between those people and a few other folks that were involved in supporting new game studios, we essentially compared, publishing versus VC, and also got help in putting together a deck, which for VC funding usually involves a lot less information that you're used to preparing for a publisher or internal like EA pitching. And so really simplifying, honing our message, and really focusing on the strength of the team and the potential of the concept. So we ended up pitching to both, Eric and Ali's teams. We then got introduced to a couple more folks through our network. And I also just did cold reach outs. Like, some of the best pitches we had was from me just sending a deck through like an email web form, and people replied. So, and I watched a bunch of YouTube videos where I'm like, oh, like this seems like a cool gaming fund. Let me get a chance to understand what they're about. So I would find videos online of them presenting at different conferences to get an idea of like, what is their thesis? What are they looking for? And then I would tailor like an email or something like that going, hey, I watched this. We're doing something similar. I think it would be interesting for you to check out our thing. And a lot of people will sometimes blast like 50 people. I ended up just focusing on maybe 20 that seemed to specifically be okay with our particular content. And out of those, we had, again, 2021, different time than it is now. We got decent interest maybe with 10 folks that ended up with us getting, a couple of term sheets to compare and pick the right partner.
So one thing that a lot of folks probably don't realize is when you're going out to VC funds, you're not just really going, it's not like you get one and then you're done. Mm-hmm. There's multiple layers, there's multiple aspects of it, and then one firm will come in and then bring in somebody else. How did you go about, tackling the whole process, basically? Mm-hmm. Was it mainly, like you said, friends, word of mouth, or how did you? I'm trying to get around to is it's an incredibly complex process. How did you do it without going crazy?
I would have to say 2021, different time. I didn't find it too complicated. I reached out mostly with what people said during that time is if you find a person who can give you, who's a lead, or the person who will set the terms of the deal and put most of the money in, then the rest of the folks will come in either through their network or other folks that you've pitched to. So the main thing was like, don't worry about, filling, like getting the whole round, just worry on like the leading partner. And so we did, and like it kind of worked out exactly as people said. Like we pitched to a bunch of folks. There was like Ed Freeze, who runs One Up Fund. He almost never leads, especially now. I don't think he leads. He only follows. And so we pitched to him. So he said, similar. It's like, if you have a lead, this is like my check size. Let me know. And so when we, agreed on the lead, at that point, the fund that introduced us to this lead, Sisu and Bitcraft, they work a lot together on deals. So they filled most of the round and made some room for Ed, and it was done. It was very simple, I would have to say. Now things are much more complicated. Now you're kind of like really selling each individual fund or investor that is coming in, whether they're a lead or not. There's a lot more hesitation, I would say, especially before you, like we're still fundraise, or we're wrapping that up, but our game is not out. It's still such a big stretch to see if we're going to be successful as a studio. There isn't metrics, so there's a lot of risk, and money's really expensive these days. So it takes now it's a lot more. It takes a lot more time. You really feel like every single check that's going to come in, you're doing like the full pitch. So these days, I wouldn't say it's more complicated. It's just a lot more effort, and it takes a lot more time.
And for the folks that don't know, explain the difference between, somebody leading and then somebody like Ed's firm coming in and following.
Yeah. So the lead fund usually is the one that will set the terms of the deal, like how much of the company that is going to be sold within this round, what's the total amount that's going to happen. So they, any other secondary, tertiary terms. So they take on the negotiating hurdle and the legal hurdle of shepherding the process from the investor side. And then the follow folks will put additional money in, but will just piggyback on what the leading investor sets out for the terms and how they shepherd the deal. And usually the leading investor puts in a large chunk of the overall round, because usually for all of their effort, they're looking for the most amount of the company in return.
So you're much smarter than me, Tatyana. I started my first company right as the recession went into the crapper in 2008. So, coming out of and it really was a different time, because our industry made so much money during the pandemic that there were a whole lot of people who weren't necessarily historical investors in games, but we're looking around going, oh my God, all of my other investments lost money and everybody's playing Animal Crossing. So it was a very, very good time to do this. All right. So we've got one question come in, and it's going to lead into some of the other ones I've got for you anyway. So Neil Ware over on YouTube says, starting an indie studio is hard. Can you tell which one of the mistakes that you made and which mistakes you often see in other studios?
So I'm going to do a little bit of a cliffhanger. This is amateur hour for me, but I realized that whatever I plugged my computer in hasn't been charging it. So I'm just going to take a minute to quickly change the plug, and I will let you fill in for the one awkward minute of silence.
Yes, because that's what I am here to do, is to fill in. Don't pay any attention to the man behind the curtain type thing. But seriously, for those of you out there watching, if you've got any questions on how to start an indie studio, especially taking that transition from AAA not down to indie, over to indie, and raising money, pop them in chat. We'll go through them. Tatyana's wonderfully going. Now that you're plugged in and you have power, don't worry. Last conference, I was halfway through one of these fireside chats before Dan popped in and went, Jay, you never hit the live button. And I'm like,
oh no.
So yeah, you're fine. Don't worry about it. Talk through the mistakes that you felt that you all made in that early stages of starting up the indie studio, and then what you see other studios doing that you can save somebody some heartache on.
So I would say that most of, I wouldn't say it's mistakes, but it's just something to watch out for um, is around hiring, like bringing the right people into the studio. The thing that I would say both we did, but also that I often see folks doing is when you start your own studio, you're very idealistic around how you want to show up in the world, and and it's really really important to realize what the values are that are truly the ones that are uncompromisable versus the aspirational ones, the ones that you still need to grow into. Because I do think that, especially during the pandemic, a lot of us came out wanting to create, like, number one, ethical places that don't burn out people. Because we had all, a bunch of us have come out of like crazy crunches and things like that. And that's all important, but I think it needs to be combined with the realities of running a small studio with limited funds, and that will, where the money will run out at some point. But also being very, very clear around, we try to enable a lot of creative ownership, and we look for people that can take it. But for example, our creative director holds the vision, and he's going to be the ultimate arbiter. And he does a fantastic job of enabling people and really, taking the best ideas. But it's the overall creative vision isn't a democratic process in our studio, and part of that is because we need to really move with speed. And anytime you're like reaching consensus, you need to be willing to spend extra time on that. And it can take up to a decade for a team that is consensus driven to become super, super efficient. And there's a lot of benefits to it, but you need to make the trade-off. So I would say that early on, we weren't as clear in terms of like, and especially bringing super experienced AAA folks, in terms of both how much responsibility they're going to have, where they might need to sacrifice some of that AAA quality that you get with having 200-person teams. Or 500-person teams where you can meticulously texture every single rock, for example, versus, hey, you are the entire level team, or you are the entire character team. And so we did have folks that got like frustrated in both the speed or how quickly you were making decisions, or that, hey, build a whole biome. Okay, I need a team of 16. Oh, that's not going to happen. So just, I would say, in hiring and setting the expectations, that's the number one kind of learning for us. We've gotten much better at being very, very clear, not being shy about it. Even if, let's say like the speed and quality, like we're pretty much like, we want to get as high quality as we can, and we're not looking to burn you out, but you need to be willing to really be smart around how things are built and how quickly we need to move. That's just like one example. But that's where I see a lot of issues is people bringing in folks based on very aspirational ideas, who they want to be, versus the reality of what the studio is like. And then there's frustration on both sides.
Yeah, I couldn't help but laugh there, because I had the very same thing when I started the company. It's like, the idealistic is like, this is what we're going to do, and this is what we're going to help. And that's all well and good and fine until it's like, we need to make payroll. So we have to try to figure something out here in the middle. Hiring it's one of the hardest things. And I've seen it, with my team. I've seen it with, teams around the world. It's not just, can you get somebody, but it's like, you've got this little bitty window to figure out, is this person going to be a long-term fit for, our project, our studio, our company, our, that sort of stuff. How did you approach hiring? One, in the sense of, how do you know it's time to bring someone on? And then two, how do you go about vetting them to make sure that investment is going to be worth it in the long run, and they're going to be with you?
So there was a couple of roles that, like, for example, our team had no artists on it. Like, it was me on the production side, it was Max on the design, creative direction side, it was Kevin and Jake on engineering, and it was Andy who was doing like technical design and animation. So we had no artist. So we knew we needed an art director. And one of the learnings from our previous experience within a big AAA part where the philosophy was like, we'll make everything work in gray box and then we'll add the art. We saw like that was a pretty big failure, as in like the art informs a lot of how things show up in gameplay and it needs to come in earlier. So one of the learnings was like, we're going to get an art director like right away and make sure we have that developing alongside gameplay. But then like a lot of the other hires was like when things got painful, honestly. It's like when our UX was really janky and the capacity of our existing design team was failing to meet those needs. We're like, yeah, we need to get a UX designer. Or our engineers are really like we really need another engineer. Sometimes there was a few times it was an opportunity, like, oh, we created this role, but like I think we were looking for a generalist 3D artist, and then we got a fantastic tech artist out of that and a bunch of other folks. So, but most of the time it's when the need is all like painfully felt. And in terms of vetting folks, again, one of the things that was frustrating to us within a big publisher was that the hiring process seemed so clunky. Like it took forever. It took like months for people to get in. The panels were so big. There was like 20 people talking for 30 minutes. The feedback seemed awkward. So we simplified it. Initially, when we had 10 people, we had almost everyone interview the person, and we just made it very clear, like, these people aren't going to talk to you about your craft. They're just going to get a feel for working together. These people will kind of get a sense of your craft. So, and the one thing that's been really useful is because we're not within a big publisher, we can talk about our game. So we were very transparent about this is what the game looks like. This is our aspiration, just to make sure that the people knew exactly what they would be building. And the game is what got people excited, which has been good. It's like they're like, believe in the concept, love the aesthetic, or something else. And then we're like, okay, you're going to be one of you. This is the scope. This is the team. Like, is this something you're up for? And this is how we work. So the folks that have come in, they love the people that they talk to. They love the game concept, and they feel prepared to take on the role. And usually the role for most people has been a bit of a stretch role, because most of us have been used to working in bigger teams with more support. So also people that are looking for a particular challenge in their career. And that, for the most part, has been really successful.
I had not thought about that aspect of it, but you're dead on. Being able to actually talk about what the game is, because a lot of times if you're interviewing with one of these big AAA studios, they can't tell you what you're actually going to be working on. But being able to get and see who's got a passion, who's excited about this type of game is, yes, that's absolutely. How was the transition going from, not just you, but the rest of the team, going from these much bigger groups where you had a very specific focused role to being on the indie side of it, where you have to take care of things that you're not normally having to do? How was that transition, and were there any road bumps or lessons learned out of that one?
So I love it. That's a personal thing. I like getting my hands into a lot of things. I enjoy being, what is it called? Like a jack of all trades, master of none. I actually embrace that. So for me, it felt very natural as to what I wanted to do. And again, having had experience of building like a kind of this new IP incubation team exposed me to a lot of like finding contractors, like signing contracts, being illegal, like doing budgets, like pitching. Like, so before I left to do the startup, I got a lot of this experience, which was fantastic. And a lot of the other stuff is pretty standardized, where we got support from legal and other friends and could ping them. So I would say that's the one thing I haven't mentioned. But the great thing about having been in the industry for 10 years, and the industry, even though games is so big as a business, the industry still feels very intimate and small. And somehow everyone ends up, having some version of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, where eventually somebody knows someone. So I got very comfortable with like pinging people, even if I haven't talked to them in years, and asking for support. And 80% of the time they answered and provided it. So yeah, just asking the network has been a huge thing. And I guess the last bit is I'm surprised at how much like grunt work I do these days. Because people have this idea of like, oh, you're a CEO of a company. I'm like, yeah, I'm not like a Fortune 500 company.
Yes.
I'm running a small indie business. Like I spend half a day like shipping stuff
Yes.
or like putting up posters on the walls, or like screenshotting receipts or things like that. So there's just like a ton of grunt work, and that's one of the things that a lot of startup people will tell you. It's like, don't feel like you're wasting your time. This is just part of the hustle, is that there's nobody else to do the grunt work, so it's on you.
But it's also, and this is the reason I still make myself do a lot of the grunt work, is because you don't get too far detached from what your team is doing, from what is important. I mean, I remember I've had bosses like this, and they were like, well, we need to be doing X. And we're like, we are doing X, and it's getting absolutely shit results. So we need to be, but if they don't see it, if they're not there as well. And so it's one of the things that, yes, we do have to do. We're not flying around in a G6, for once we are running small studios as the CEOs. But it's good to have to do that grunt work and to not detach yourself from it, because it keeps you much more in focus with what everybody else is going through. I mean, so this leads into like the obvious question. How do you all tackle crunch and all of that stuff coming out of AAA and having to deal with it for so many years? How have you adapted things as an indie studio to, I'm not even going to say eliminate, but lessen that effect?
So the great thing about like a project that takes 20 people and that is completely comprehensible is that you can see it. Like you can see when things are too much, people feel it. It's not so complex that it feels obfuscated of how much work is actually left. And at least in my experience, because of the complexity and the unknowns and the amount of like knock-on effects that happen when you work in a 500 to 900 person studio, is that it is really impossible to predict exactly, when things need to be cut and what the knock-on effects are, and how much work will come together when the game is stood up, and then you realize half the systems don't gel the way that they were designed to gel. So there's a lot more predictability with just a smaller scope project. In that way, that, for example, last December, we had an offsite, and one of the big focus areas was everyone was feeling that the game was too big. Like we still had a year and a half to go, but we all felt like it was too big. So we went through an exercise for 2 days where we laid out all the features. We really prioritized which were the most essential to the experience, and we looked at it in like 3 different ways, like bullseye exercises, some like charts, flow charts, things like that. And in the end, we basically reduced about a third of the game. That helped people ease, and now as we're in production, we're continuing to scope down. So reducing both like the amount of things that people need to focus on, but also like the overall thing really helps. And then the other part is just making really smart design and tech decisions. So our studio tech director specifically made a conscientious choice to use as much off-the-shelf products versus building custom things like for backend, et cetera, and work around those constraints. And kind of pushing the design to work around those constraints, because the less engineering has to support proprietary things, the more bandwidth they have to focus on game features. And then we do we switch how we work on the game too. So we go through periods where we focus on like feature development, And then we always have a polish time where we take a step back from adding new things and just play the game as a holistic experience and get a sense of things. And that type of work where you're just knocking out bugs in priority order really, really quickly is a way to always have a realistic view of how far you are from shippable quality. So it's a lot of different tools that we've learned. We still have a year before we come out, so I'm sure it's going to get harder to manage that. But generally, we believe weekends are good. They help you decompress and relax. We never require weekend work. We would rather have people put in some extra hours during the week. We have flexible arrangement too, so we really encourage people to work when they feel the most productive. So we have some folks that will run errands during the day and then they feel really productive in the evening, so that's when they go. So maximizing how people work plus just making smart scoping decisions is how we've been able to do it so far. But really, all of that will be tested when we get closer to launch.
Everything's good until it comes time to launch, right?
Yeah, you have to be incredibly smart. I mean, I would say that the difference between like me as a producer early on versus me now is me as a producer early on was like how do we optimize to get the most things complete, to check everything. Me as a producer now is like the more things you complete, the more knock-on effects it's going to have. Like the more bugs you fix, the more new bugs you will have. So for me these days, it's much less about like optimizing for getting the most work done, but getting the right work done and controlling the consequences of that.
It's interesting that, there's actually methods of controlling the consequences, because many times there's just out of the blue. What are some of the things that you can't do at an indie studio that you were used to and comfortable doing at the AAA level?
Piling people on at the end. No, I mean, like, a lot of the solve for getting mass amount of content done, or like you can postpone certification for consoles where you pull plugs and things like that, and you just need to complete those TCRs, is you can pull people from other projects that are just great engineers or lighters or artists, and you can give them a very specific task in an engine that they're familiar with, and they can get it done. They won't be as efficient, and like part of the actually a lot of the crunch that happens at the end of the big games is like waiting for builds and waiting to see if your thing actually made it through and if it was correct. Because all of a sudden, even if you triple build capacity, you go from having 200 people check in to 600 people check in, and all of a sudden, like, I think I fixed this lighting, there's a review tomorrow, but I need to wait 4 hours or 8 hours to see if it made it through, and with everybody else's check-ins, if it's still looking correct. So like the turnaround time on doing your work and making sure it's done and didn't mess up anything else gets really, really hard at the end. So a lot of people complain that it's like a lot of crunch is just waiting around to see if your thing actually went in. Because you're stuck, right? Like you have to get something in because it needs to get approved, but that be like you're waiting for it. Yeah.
All right, so we've got a question, and we're going to answer the question real quick, but it's going to also lead into another one. So Cyber Shell says, what % of your projects are supported by investors versus studio? Well, obviously this is your first game, so everything is investor supported, but have you secured a publisher yet? Or are you still looking for a publisher? Where did the whole decision between, because a lot of people that get the funding, they're like, oh, we'll self-publish. Where have you all fallen on that scale?
So we are getting a distribution partner. So we're not doing marketing ourselves. We're not doing like a lot of those strategic decisions. So we're doing both. We've gotten investor money to develop the game, and then we are also going to be partnering with a publisher to take the game to market. And for us, the big reason of still choosing to go with a publisher is that publishing functions on a different heartbeat than development. It's not a heartbeat that we're particularly familiar with or feel that we can take on for our first game. It has to do with doing market research into what is the closest genre comp, how do you optimize Steam, which languages should you prioritize, because every language is expensive. So if you could only, let's say, afford 4 to 5 initially before you can add more, which should those be? Which territories do you go after? Every territory has different channels where the players get their news. So there's a lot of it's an art of how to get the message about your game to the right people, that I wouldn't say that you learn as like a game dev just creating a game. There is, or at least for us, there's a support system, and we appreciate how intricate and important that is to the overall success of the game. Like, we build a really cool game that we believe in, but we also need somebody who knows how to get it into the right hands. And I think there's a lot of viral successes within the indie game industry, but I wouldn't look at the survivor bias, around those. Like, some of them could be luck, right? Like, so if we take luck off the table, then there's a lot of value to having a distribution.
And even if you are comfortable on the marketing side, I mean, the marketing side of the industry changes rapidly. My career has changed more than a dozen times. But if you're only launching a game every 3 or 4 years, what worked 3 or 4 years ago isn't going to work now. It's a completely different thing. So,
that's true.
But that's good that, you all can say, okay, look, this is not our area of expertise, nor do we want to deal with this. So, let's outsource it and not outsource. Find a
partner with somebody. Yeah. Partner with somebody who we have confidence in. I would say that I always think of running a game studio and getting your game out there is like that meme that's like, it's dangerous to go alone, take this. Like, you need buddies and you need like the right tool set. Like, don't just go blindly into a boss fight.
And when you hit that room that has just a ton of weapons and ammo and medical supplies, and then there's a door, you're getting ready to walk into a boss fight. So you need to get ready.
Yep.
What do you feel? I mean, looking back over the last couple of years, what do you feel are, is one or some of the key things that if you had to do it over again, you would change this part?
Sometimes it's hard to see this from, perspective, like until the game is done. But I immediately feel like you really should take advantage of market conditions because they change so quickly. It's like whatever is viral. So for us, we raised in like spring of 2021, and then we're like, okay, we're good for a year, and then we can do this again. But the market was heating up. We could have pitched and gotten the additional funding right away when there was a lot of appetite, but we actually held people off because we were like, but then things started crashing, and all of a sudden that was much, much harder. So I would say funding wise, if there's, let's say, Netflix is giving out great deals, or, Microsoft is having this whole new program, whenever there is like good market conditions, to just take advantage of those, because that's probably the most unpredictable kind of core to survival thing of an independent game studio is getting funds. So instead of trying to get the optimal scenario, take advantage of what's like, keep your ears to the ground and see what's happening. And this is more of a joke, but at 35 people, 20 full time, this game is about 4 times as big as we initially set out to be. We were going to be an 8-person studio, working on a much simpler game. And I always laugh with my co-founder. I'm like, what the hell did you get us into? Like, this game has like 3x the budget, 3x the people, 3x the scope. Like, this is not what we signed up for our first title. But he made a good point in that, part of our survival is making a game that people care about. And like having the right scope and the right quality level is important. There's for sure tons of examples of people who bootstrap with 1 to 2 people that can do it, but it is less guaranteed. Like having a really well-featured, high-quality game in the mid-case scenario, in the medium scenario is important. But that's my one regret. I'm like, why did we do this to ourselves?
This little group thing was started 13 years ago, and I only put that word in there so people would think that we were bigger than it was just me. And same thing over the last couple of years, we've grown, and I turn around and I'm like, oh shit, what now? It's like I didn't mean to run a whole company, but apparently we're going to do that now.
Oops. Yeah.
So it is very important. This is the last question, and I'll let you go after this. It is important to take advantage of those marketing conditions. And we see it a lot in hardware manufacturers, like you mentioned with Microsoft. And on VR side, we've seen it with Pico and Quest, and they're like throwing out money. And then all of a sudden they're like, okay, we're not handing out any more money. How do you go about trying to figure out how much runway you're going to need and plan for it that way? Like you said, you raise that one round, you're like, we're good for a year, but that game's not going to be done in a year. How far out there do you recommend people start planning for a cushion?
So I have a 10-year budget, and the granularity of that budget, like in 2 to 3 years ahead, I kind of have a pretty good list of like, this is how much we'll pay for software. This is the budget for outsourcing. This is, roughly the team size that we need, roughly what the roles will be. And the actual details change a lot under it. But having that structure and overall, like I said, the overall budget for the game has been, like, since we've decided to make it bigger, has mostly stabilized. But the details of it have kind of changed. And like I said, I roughly always have like a 10-year projection of how we want to grow as a company. So I would say that you can ballpark it. You can do like a year out, like with that level of granularity of like, I need 10 Adobe licenses. That's going to be this. I need, 10 people, roughly this. I'll probably need outsourcing for, and like, I gut estimated, I did some like the most we'll spend on art will be this, and I've corrected it as we sign on vendors and get a better understanding and using that to project in the future. So yeah, get some kind of a production person, try to at least, if you can't get to the details, at least try to get a sense of, okay, I want to, let's say, a $3 to $5 million game. It's going to take 3 years. There's going to be some ramped up from year 1 to year 3. This is how that money will roughly distribute by months, and then start to fill in the details and validate if that's correct or not.
That is fantastic. And everybody out there, if you have questions about this, ask Tatyana, because if she has a 10-year plan, I'm doing good to have a 2-month plan. She's obviously the expert on all this. Thank you so much. This has been awesome. Wishing you the very best continued success with everything at FuzzyBot. We're going to wrap this one up and kick it over to Dan next. And we've got some IP law information coming to you. And after that one, that'll wrap up our show. So thank you. As always, everybody else, stick around for just a few minutes and then we'll be back again. Thanks, everybody.